How are you? You're listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. And this is a redo of our interview with Bill O'Reilly. And it was based upon his book, Bill O'Reilly, Confronting the Presidents. It's the 19th number one bestseller. Many of you who've listened to and read Bill O'Reilly's book about killing Lincoln, killing Kennedy, killing Martin Luther King, a lot of excellent books. This was Confronting the Presidents, and I just think it's so appropriate to replay the Bill O'Reilly show, especially now, 10 days into President Donald Trump's second term. He's issued more executive orders and taken more actions in the last 10 days than most presidents do in their first term. What it was Bill Ronald Reagan was the last president that they moved the swearing in inside, and that was actually inside of the greeting room at the White House, and there were about 90 people there, and that was in 1985, his second term, and it was 20 some degrees below zero outside, and they had to cancel all the bands. So Ronald Reagan holds the record for the coldest inauguration day. And I wanted to just a couple of the inauguration days that are mentioned in Bill O'Reilly's book include that story about Ronald Reagan, but also Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, president election, Jimmy Carter won against Gerald Ford. They wanted to change from the old politics of Vietnam and Watergate. In the end, the results were close, but Carter wins by 57 electoral votes. To show his populist roots, Jimmy Carter steps out of the presidential limousine on Inauguration Day and walks the parade route from the Capitol to the White House, a distance of 3 miles. He's displaying that he's a man of the people, letting America know that they elected a new breed of president. And then I did want to just give you one more clip, and this was of Barack Obama when George W. Bush was 62 years old when he left the White House on January 20th, 2009. This is again from Bill O'Reilly's book, Confronting the Presidents. And there's no doubt that his legacy is mixed due to the war on terror, but it's also apparent that he conducted himself with dignity. As his successor, Barack Obama is sworn in. Bush gives him a handwritten letter. And President Bush's letter to Barack Obama states, "There will be trying moments. The critics will rage. Your friends will disappoint you. But you will have the Almighty God to comfort you, a family that loves you, and a country that is pulling for you, including me." And that was George Bush to Barack Obama with a lesson learned. So stay tuned and listen to the Bill O'Reilly interview about confronting the presidents.
Former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Welcome to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. I'm your host, Rich Giardino. We have an exciting, interesting show tonight. Bill O'Reilly, who for 16 years led Fox News as the number one show on cable network. You can follow Bill at BillO'Reilly.com. He's now followed by millions of people across the world, not only this country. He's heard nightly by 6 million individuals on the No Spin News, which you can get on X, his podcast, or Google at any of the places like Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and X. He's heard weekdays on 225 stations across the country and on the Pandora app. He's just written a new book that we discussed tonight called Confronting the Presidents. This book was now named number one bestseller by the New York Times after only being out for 2 weeks. It's now joins the other 18 number one bestsellers. He's the most prolific author and the highest rated author of nonfiction him and his partner Dugard, who wrote these books, Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy, Killing Reagan, and several other 18 other books. We have an interesting conversation today discussing not only confronting the presidents, the best presidents and worst presidents that we've had, but also discussing politics today, where this country is headed, and what he thinks you need to do to get more involved in your community. You're gonna enjoy today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, welcome to our program, Mr. O'Reilly. It's great to have you on. Looking forward to our interview, sir.
Thanks for having me on, Sheriff. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. In the interest of transparency, I was on the Bill O'Reilly show several months ago talking about the Trump unsealing of the indictment, and it was a great opportunity. Also, Mr. O'Reilly, or Bill O'Reilly, and I met several years ago when he spoke at the Italian American Bar, and I was a judge at the time and co-chairman, and as weighty as my responsibilities were as a judge, I was tasked with getting to the airport on time, and he's here today, so I did a good job, I think, with that.
Yeah, we had some mutual friends, the Spencer family over in Amsterdam, and you run a really good county up there, Judge. So I want to say hello to everybody in Fulton County, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Bill, this is your 19th #1 bestseller. It comes out New York Times list, and Confronting the Presidents. And I found it as a judge and a lawyer and a DA, it was so well written that it's an easy read. Usually I used to have law clerks do my reading, but it's an easy read for me. And once you get into it, there's so much history, and so many of these presidents have idiosyncrasies. I found that amazing. Could you share with us, because of the limited time, what presidents you found to be the best presidents the country's had, and those that you would say not so good or the worst ones?
Okay, so Confronting the Presidents is basically a journey that takes you from Washington, one of our greatest presidents, because he forged the nation. His vision was, can't have 13 individual governments. Even though we do have state governments, we've got to have one central power on the federal government. That was Washington's vision, and he carried it out. And then we take you all the way to Biden. In the interim, we got a whole bunch of upstate New York guys like Grover Cleveland and Martin Van Buren and all of these guys that somehow found their way into the presidency. It's an amazing story. So all the 45 guys are profiled in each chapter. You read the whole book, you're going to know about your history. So far and away, the best president, Sheriff, was Abraham Lincoln. And the reason is that Lincoln inherited the worst thing ever in our country, the Civil War. The worst president came before him, immediately before him, James Buchanan of Pennsylvania, who was a coward and did nothing to stop the growing rebellion in the South. For 4 years, Buchanan just turned his back and allowed the South to rise up in ferocity, to arm itself, to abuse Union depots. The guy was a disaster. Lincoln comes in from Illinois, and if you look at a picture of Lincoln when he walks into the White House, and then you look at a picture of him 4 years later, just before he was assassinated, you won't know it's the same human being. The unbelievable pressure on him. He loses a young son dies of disease. His wife, Mary, is a nut. I mean, this guy had more, and he got us through it. So we got Washington second, Lincoln first. Franklin Delano Roosevelt gets the Depression and World War II. I don't think I want to hang around with FDR. Teddy Roosevelt's much more my style. But when you look at the 4 terms, he was elected 4 times. Franklin Delano Roosevelt helped the nation in so many ways that resonate today. He's got to be in there. Now, as far as worst is concerned, you got a lot to pick from. I have Joe Biden as the second worst, and a lot of people say, oh, that's ideological. It's not. It's not. The reason I have him so low is because Biden created the problems. Most of the other bad presidents, Herbert Hoover, Andrew Johnson, people like that. They inherited the problems and they couldn't fix them. And they made them worse sometimes. Biden created the open border. Not Congress, not a political party. Sign the order, let them on in. Catastrophe. And we'll be dealing with that for decades to come. Biden walks into office, Trump leaves him a 1.4% inflation rate. Within a year, it's over 9%. Working people in America get hammered, still getting hammered. So if you look at how Biden governed, and I asked my friends who are going to vote for Kamala Harris, so give me one thing, just one, that Biden Harris has done to improve the country in 3.5 years. Give me one. I don't want to know you're going to be a unifier. I don't want to know that aspirational. I don't want any of that. That's BS. Give me one thing they did. Crickets. We got nothing.
True.
All right. So that's why Biden is low. And then it was Franklin Pierce. He was an alcoholic. There was Warren Harding. He was a disaster. So we've had our share of bad presidents.
Bill, one of the things I notice is there's repeating themes even today. What I realize is a lot of times the press was putting their thumb on the scale or trying to, even with the newspapers in the early days. That was one theme. The other one I thought was fascinating was they talk about how hostile the environment is for politics. Well, mama, who's my pa? And you had a lot of negative things going on. I mean, you might elaborate a little on that. So we've always had negative campaigning, and we've always had the press weighing in. I don't think it's been as bad as it is today with the press weighing in the negative. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're right, because we have social media now that never happened before, and we have a corrupt corporate media that basically isn't trying to inform, it's trying to make money. And the easiest way to make money is speaking to the choir. So we're going to tell you what you want to hear. That's not news reporting. So when I wrote Confronting the Presidents, the reason I did this is, number one, they don't teach the urchins in school history anymore.
They don't.
I mean, nobody knows anything. If you go out in Fulton County Sheriff and you go, hey, how about that Chester A. Arthur? They're going to go, isn't he a rapper? Chester A., I like him. He's a rapper, right? They don't know anything. So I put it in, because I'm a former high school teacher myself, into a fun way, a fun read. Now, one of the most vicious political campaigns in our history was the second one. George Washington walked into the office. He didn't have any dissent. All right. Some people didn't like him, but he was appointed president. Then it was John Adams, who was Washington's vice president, against Thomas Jefferson, who was Secretary of State. Nasty, off the chart. Off the chart nasty. They didn't like each other. The attacks were scurrilous. On and on. But most people in America couldn't read in 1804. All right. They actually, it's 1798. They couldn't read. So the media didn't play a very big role other than the elite people. Now, with the dopey phones, all right, people can't get away from. Every 2 seconds, you're seeing something on this, and most of it isn't true. So it's much easier to mislead people. We live in a United States of propaganda. And unfortunately, a lot of us aren't smart enough to see through the propaganda.
Well, I'm one of your regular viewers, and I encourage my people to listen to the No Spin News, because you have continued to speak up and speak out, and that's important. Another theme I noticed is that a lot of these people early on, two things. One, they didn't really seek out the presidency for their egos. They actually believed in seeking out the presidency to try to help get a floundering government on the right path. I felt from reading your book. The other part I thought was interesting is that they all had really bizarre idiosyncrasies that today would have been exploited and blown up in the media. What did you find? What were some of the more bizarre habits? Like, one thing I did like is I liked the wait. What time were they? Did they get up late? Did they get up early? Did they stay up late? And I think that shows people that there's hard workers and there was guys just getting through.
Right. Well, they're all a little crazy. I mean, you have to be to pursue that line of work, with all due respect. So John Quincy Adams every morning got up and he walked 2 miles to the Potomac River and he took off all his clothes and jumped in. So every morning he's swimming naked in the river. He'd be in jail now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then there are the people on the banks of the Potomac going, isn't that the president down there? William Howard Taft, 350 pounds. He gets trapped in the bathtub. He can't get out. He's turning red. He pulls the little lever for the White House valet. White House valet has to pop him out of the bathtub before he drowns because he was so big he couldn't get out. So what does Taft do? He orders a bigger bathtub.
Yeah.
We've had so many eccentric presidents. I mean, Lyndon Johnson, one of the most corrupt presidents, by the way, but this guy was eccentric off the chart, what he would do and how he would conduct himself. Never get away with it today. But we live in a country where if you're going to pursue power to that extent, you got to be a little bit off, you know,
Correct.
You have to be. And all of them had that, as you put it, idiosyncrasy that Martin Dugard, my co-author, and I ferret out. And we did that to show you that these weren't gods. These were just regular men.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And they were by happenstance propelled into this position. The final point I want to make about that is we write about Theodore Roosevelt, by the way, didn't want to be called Teddy. If you called President Roosevelt Teddy, you got in trouble.
See, everybody thought that was what he liked to be called, though.
No.
In history.
Colonel, Mr. President, or Theodore, because when he was a little kid, he almost died. He was a very sickly kid. And everybody called him Teddy, and you want to be reminded of that. He had a terrible problem with his oldest teenage daughter, Alice. She's smoking in a White House, trying to smuggle boys in. I mean, it was like constant friction. And we wrote about this to let the reader identify with them as human beings. I think that's very, very important.
That's what I thought was fascinating. And like I said before, I mean, it was so interesting how they conducted themselves. Some were presidential, others were not so presidential. But the other two themes, I thought, some more themes I saw, because you had some great themes that just go right through history. One was the economy. And Martin Van Ruin, as they called him, right, in the campaign, because he had the banks closing, a run on the banks. And I have to tell you, I never realized that people had mortgages back in 1837. And when I read the chapter, I said, wow, I didn't think that people had mortgages. I thought people just built their houses and lived there, you know? And I didn't realize that now today we got the economy, and they keep touting Bidenomics and what a great program it is. And your income has gone up under Biden. Well, your expenses have tripled while your income's gone up a third, you know? So how does that help?
Down. The economy back in the 19th century was based on gold and silver and people manipulating that market. And some of it got out of control, and then the markets would crash. Most people who lived in the cities had mortgages, but not in the country. So if you were a pioneer, you staked the claim, but you didn't have any mortgage on it, unless there was a city near you or a county seat where you could go in and say, this is my property and I've got a fence around it and blah, 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 blah. Andrew Jackson was the guy who really started the modern economy. He didn't want the federal government to run the economy, wanted each state to do it. So he opposed the national bank. It caused a lot of problems because each state had its own currency, and then some states didn't have a lot of backup, and on and on and on. You got to have a strong federal presence when you're dealing with a national economy. And it took the nation about, 60, 70 years to develop that. Mm-hmm. And that was why it was so turbulent. And most Americans had a barter economy. So they would help their neighbor with something, and then their neighbor would give them this, and they get food from a farmer, and then they build a farmer's house or give the farmer 5 cows or whatever it may be. It was called a barter economy. But now, after the Great Depression, which just wiped out any semblance of confidence in the federal government because so many people were suffering. And it wasn't Herbert Hoover's fault. He walked into it, but he couldn't solve it, and he made it worse. And that's why Roosevelt came in, and at least Roosevelt tamped it down a little. And then Roosevelt had World War II, which was an astronomical challenge. But now the economy goes up and down also based on speculation. So I report today on the No Spin News, Sheriff, and I can't tell you how happy I am that you're watching, that under Biden-Harris, our national debt has increased by $7 trillion. $7 trillion in 3.5 years. That's unsustainable. You can't do it. And what is Vice President Harris promising? $25,000 free money if you want to buy a house. Can't do it. I mean, it's a bunch of bull. The Treasury would collapse. You can't do it.
Yeah, but that's not how the press portrays it. They just the press
doesn't care.
So I got a question for
Trump. Yeah.
Before we go on to today's election and Trump, I did I read right? So people subscribe to your show, then they get to pick a book a year, right? So they could pick.
You get a free book.
Okay.
So if you become a premium member to BillO'Reilly.com or Concierge, which is the highest level, and you get access directly to me on the Concierge one, you get any book you want free. You get Confronting, or you get any of the Killing books. And we are the most successful nonfiction authors, Sheriff, in the world.
Yeah, 19. This would be 19. Well, let me ask you this. So they can also get you on X, on podcasts, right? They can get you all the premium shows.
Right.
And then, so one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, is there a Killing Trump book in the future? And I'm even hesitant to say that because the Secret Service is so incompetent. Before I was going to say incompetent, but it's an intentional blind spot. And now they said the FBI head out of Miami is investigating Trump, and he had to take down all his anti-Trump protests.
Yeah.
He's investigating the last thing. So tell us about, is there a Trump book? And is this blind neglect, or is this intentional that they allow this?
So I already wrote the Trump book, The United States of Trump, and it was a #1 bestseller, and it'll tell you all you want to know about Donald Trump. I won't write another Trump book, but your question is a good one. So you have a bureaucracy in Washington, and the bureaucracy is headed by political appointees. This is the key. Not skilled law enforcement officers like you and your staff in Fulton County. No. They bring in people, the presidents do, all right, and they appoint them to be in charge. Now, obviously, if you looked at the congressional testimony, the woman heading the Secret Service didn't know what she was doing.
Correct.
Didn't know what she was doing. She's gone. It was so embarrassing. But the head of the agency then appoints regional directors. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to get the best and brightest. That's the problem. In the FBI, it's been so infused with ideology now, left-wing ideology. It used to be right-wing. When J. Edgar Hoover, who was a villain, ran it, it was a right-wing organization. Now it's a left-wing organization. It shouldn't be any wing.
Correct.
It should be totally apolitical. Now, I understand the president has to appoint, but these presidents are appointing people who will do what they're told. They're yes men, Sheriff. That's what the problem is now.
But Bill, why do you and I and millions of Americans see that, and yet you can't break? I have friends who are very intelligent that say, you support Trump, and I said, I don't like what he says. I like his policies. I can't get them to not buy into the villain that Trump is and just look at policies. And they have really gone after him. And the rhetoric, if he said some of the same stuff that they say about him, then they would be condemning him. But they're not slowing down, Bill.
Here's the problem with America today. People believe what they want to believe, not what's true. And you see it in law enforcement. How many times have you arrested someone who committed a crime and they have an excuse for the crime, right? How many times do you hear that? Yeah. Everybody is, right? Everybody's excuse. Oh, no, it's not my fault. They made me do it, or I had to do it, or whatever. I mean, it's all bull. Mm-hmm. So now where we are as a nation is that millions of Americans hate Trump. And okay, I understand that. He can be pretty overbearing. Mm-hmm. I've known him for 35 years. Never given me, well, I shouldn't say that. When he gives me a hard time, I give it right back to him. You know, I'm the kind of guy who not going to take that. But I understand he's so bellicose. He can be obnoxious. He never admits a mistake. I got it. But I would rather have somebody who's got a proven record for 4 years that increased real wages more than 7%, kept us pretty calm overseas, and stopped the mass border problem than a person who won't answer a single serious question, like Vice President Harris.
She wouldn't come on the Bill O'Reilly No Spin News. You know that, right? Of course.
Her career would be over. She comes on here and she goes into the no spin zone, Sheriff. Her career's over. Okay.
She's not coming out.
And I wouldn't be rude to her. I would never be rude to her. When I interviewed Barack Obama 3 times, I was respectful, and we disagreed on some issues, but I respected him standing up and coming on it. But for her, I wouldn't let her dodge. I wouldn't let her tell me about her middle-class upbringing 18 times. You know, I'd say, with all due respect, Madam Vice President, you know, I answer the question. You want me to rephrase it? And that's why she'd never do it.
What are the risks? Let's say this. What happens depending on who wins? What happens to this country? We're a very resilient country, but can we take 4 more years of a Harris, let's say Harris Walz? And with that question, if you got a couple more minutes, how come nobody's talking about Walz and the fact that he went to China 30-some times and he praises the Chinese? Nobody's talking about that. To me, what's he doing over in China and why is he praising them? But what happened to the country?
Yeah, he's got some kind of program over there that he was trying to get Chinese money into Minnesota, investment money. I don't really care that much about him. He's a radical leftist, just like she is. All right. So the cliche is 2 peas in a pod. You got 2 peas. They're progressive radicals, by far the most leftist ticket in American history, by far. And so what you have then is an electorate, many of whom are just uninformed. They just don't know. Now, your question is, what happens if Harris and Walz win? It depends on who controls Congress. If the Republicans control both houses or even just the Senate, Harris will have a very tough time. She's not going to get any of her crazy things passed. And when she writes an executive order, it'll be immediately appealed to the federal courts. So she says now, her latest is, well, if you have medical bills, I'm going to forgive the debt. You don't have to pay them. That's never, ever going to pass the Supreme Court. The Harris people know all that, but a lot of Americans don't. They don't understand how it works. But if Congress stays Republican, then they're not going to be able to do as much damage as they could. If the Democrats control all of Washington, watch out. Traditional America disappears.
We always need split government. New York State's a terrible example where you got a governor, Senate, and Assembly. Right. I know we're running a little bit on time, but do you have a minute or two to?
Yeah, sure.
What are the important, and how do we get people to listen to the No Spin News or other views that give you a more honest take on it? And like you said, I've listened to you when you've gone after Republicans and gone after them. I mean, It really is no spin. You know, I don't mind coming on as a guest. I don't want to come in as a target. But tell me, how do we who understand try to educate without being silenced or canceled? How do we get people to wake up? I mean,
it's all local. So in Fulton County, I would tell people, try to get on the school boards, try to get involved in your neighborhood, write letters to the editor in the local papers, form clubs, civic clubs. If you're a vet, VFW, it's got to be local. All right. And you got to let your opinion be known, but in a rational way, not in a bombastic way or a hateful way. Say, look, this is why I believe what I believe. As far as my operation is concerned, here's something very interesting, Sheriff. So I left Fox News, far and away the highest rated cable show. Nobody's ever beat us. Nobody ever will beat us. We had 2 runs, about 6 million a night. 3 times that many people watch me every night now through YouTube, social media, all of our distribution points. We're all over the place. So they did a survey this summer, and it was just astronomical how many people were viewing me all over the world, not just in the United States, because YouTube is everywhere. And so we have seized upon that access to build an empire here. And that's why the ratings for the network news and the cable news are all going down. Nobody's growing. And it's mostly older folks watching that can't figure out how to get to YouTube. I'd probably be one of those folks, by the way. I don't know what's going on, but I got a younger staff who saves me. And I just did, before I came in to talk to you, we have a YouTube channel, and I did commentaries for the YouTube channel. And I'll get letters from Madagascar, from Chile, all over the world. So I do the best I can. And my theme has always been simple. I look out for the folks. That's it.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Beck, your good buddy Beck had me on his program when Cuomo was trying to tell people how many people come to Thanksgiving, and I put you and him as the pinnacle of people to listen to who are trying to ring the bell and raise the warnings, And I thank both of you. And when you're on, when you tell them the sheriff from upstate New York says hi, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that I missed that you think
No, I think you got it. And I'm glad you read Confronting the President, Sheriff. You're a good guy. You're an honest public servant. Everybody in Fulton County should know that. And anytime you need me, you just give me a ring, okay?
And anytime you need a ride to the airport, I'm there for you, buddy. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, Mr. O'Reilly.
Okay.
Talk to you later. You've been listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. This was a special edition, a replay of the Bill O'Reilly interview, Confronting the Presidents. It's the number 19 best-selling, number 1 bestseller of Bill O'Reilly and his co-author, Martin Dugard. It's about the various presidents. I hope you learned a little bit about them. I urge you to buy the Bill O'Reilly book, Confronting the Presidents. And we are in for some very fascinating and interesting times. And you'll see, or you'll hear if you buy it on tape, listening to the book by Bill O'Reilly, all the different nuances that we didn't hear about that weren't necessarily public about the presidents and their leadership. So this is going to be a very interesting 4 years for the country. It's going to be a fast-moving 4 years for President Trump, who you've already seen in the first 10 days has taken more action, appointed more individuals, more executive orders, and more statements that have altered, that are going to alter history. Probably one of the quickest one was in Colombia, where the president wasn't going to take the illegal immigrants being sent back, and he sent 2 U.S. planes back. President Trump said he was going to raise the tariffs 25% for 1 week and then 50% the next. And within 6 hours, the president turned around, the president of Colombia turned around and said, okay, we'll send our presidential plane to come get them and we'll take them. So Trump is a master of playing the art of the game, and he's taking his business skills and putting them to use in the second term. You've been listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. Thank you.
Like and subscribe to the Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.